Okay, so let me start with struts to validation. This is where we stopped last time. So initially we discussed about struts config files, and then we moved over to struts to validations. So we'll go through the struts to validation first, and then we'll slowly recap over some of the items as well. So see, validation is one of the very important components of a web application. So either you have server side validation, you have client side validation, or you have both. So if you are having only client side validation, that can be accomplished using JavaScripts. Uh, on server side, if you are using just a servlet application, you can get the inputs, you can put your own validation framework around. But typically, if you are using a MVC application, a model view controller application, an example of which is Struts 2, then what will happen is that these frameworks out of box provide some features or the way in which you can implement validation. So using this, you can implement validation in your application, and you don't have to write a separate framework code to plug in validation inside your entire application stuff. You just have to write it at the level of uh, we just write it at the level of like configuration, etc. Only when you are not able to do it, the validations which are provided by the validators already available is not sufficient. You can write your own custom validator. So it gives you best of both the worlds. It gives you configurations and ways to use existing inbuilt validators, and if they're not sufficient, you can write your own custom validators as well. So that is the entire. In short, you can say that is what validation framework in Struts 2 is all about. Okay. So as I mentioned in first two lines, Struts 2 supports server-side validation, and to implement validations, the very basic need is that the action class, and if you remember correctly, the action class in Struts 2 can be a POJO, that is pure old Java object. And if it is a POJO, and you just extend the action support class, okay. So action support is one of the default classes, which default action classes, it implements some of the methods and gives it to you. So the way in which this works is, let's say action supposed to do validation, etc., etc. So action support and all this thing is done in Struts 2 via interfaces. So they have an interface, say I validation aware, and what action support will do is it will implement I validation aware. So okay, and it provide like if I validation aware has a method validate, action support just provides a default implementation for it, maybe a blank implementation, keeps it there. So ideally, when we are writing our own action classes, if we extend action support, we just implement or override the validate method, and we are done. Nothing more is required. So we just stop then and there. We do not do anything more. Okay. So let's see here. So this particular class employee. Okay. Now this is extending action support, and there are two attributes, name and age. Now these two attributes must be there on the JSP as well, from to which this particular action class is associated with. Okay, and the method name is execute. So execute you always have to write. There is a way, you can write some of the methods as well. You have to configure it in the struts2.xml, struts.xml. But if you have not overridden, you have not given the method name, you have to like the default method name which the struts framework will look for is execute. Okay, and from there, if you remember, we just returned string, and that string should match with one of the result names in the action class mapping which we have for the struts action. Okay, and once you find this particular mapping, the corresponding JSP will be loaded. All right, now this validate. Now the validate method, if you see what we are overriding here, now you're providing your own custom, your own validation here. Like say if the name is null, or if it is just space, or if the age is between, like is less than 28 or greater than 65. So you are implementing your own custom conditions here. You can just go ahead and hard code this stuff. put your validations here directly, and if they do not satisfy your validation level, then you can give add field error and give the field name and the message. Okay. Now, if you see, this add field error has two parameters. One is name, okay, and the one is the message. So the name is what is this particular name, and this is the actual message which should come up. Okay, so that's how in your typical action class, in one of the very easiest ways, if you have been asked to implement validation, what you do is that you extend a default action support class, sorry, a default implementation which is an action support class. The name is action support, and you go ahead and override the validate method. You give the field for which you want to do the validation, and then you do add field error if the validation has failed. And the add field error method will be there in the action support class. It has two parameters. The first one should correspond exactly with the name which is defined here, and it should be obviously defined in the GSP page as well. And the second one corresponds to the actual message which you want to display. Okay. Now see, this is an example as well here which I am showing. So we are displaying name and age. Okay. Now if you do not give any value in the name field, if you do not give any value in the age field and click on submit, now you are going to get this message: the name is required, the age must be between 28 and 65. Now the thing is that what changes are required in the GSP, because if this message is coming up, actually there's a GSP which is getting rendered, right? So if that is coming up, and if you give both information correctly, employee information is captured successfully will come. So if both name and age messages are coming up, and GSP is involved for this particular page here, and whatever I was showing earlier, then it means that there must be some changes which we have to do in the GSP page as well, right? Actual answer is, if you're using Struts tags, the answer is no. So if you're using, like, say, s colon text field and give the name, this Struts tag internally checks what error messages are associated with this particular name, and if it is associated, it displays then and there. There is no other changes required in the GSP page as such. Okay, so and that's what I have mentioned here as well. Since we used Struts 2 tags, the Struts framework will add the error to the corresponding field name. To facilitate this, we use add field error method. Alright, now yes, now to how to invoke this validation, right? Now how will Struts, Struts will do the validation, but when there is some kind of error, right, the field error method is there. How does Struts know what further needs to be done? So what you need to define is that if there is any field error method, you need to define this particular line in all the action classes wherever you are implementing some kind of validation. The result name has to be input, and you have to give the name of the GSP page which you want to get rendered when when your validation fails. So typically it's the same page which gets shown when on which you're trying to implement the validation, but you have the option of doing some other page as well where you can just give your inputs failed validation. That's it. Click here to exit. So that kind of information can be available. So the thing is, the basic idea is, if there is any field level error, okay, if there is any field level error, you have to define a tag result with the name as input and give the value, and this will be rendered when your particular page fails validation and you have to reload a page. So the reloading, you have to specify which GSP you want to load. So this is the change which is required in the struts.xml. Okay, now let me stop here and let me ask. So this is about the field level messages, right? So let me stop here and ask whether you guys understood about this part, not understood, like what is the deal?